Bill Gallagher is a seasoned entrepreneur and coach who shares his insights on overcoming business plateaus and the significance of effective leadership. Bill details his journey from ticket hustling and running a paper route, becoming a CEO, and eventually transitioning into coaching. He introduces his foundational framework, the Leadership Flywheel, which focuses on 4 key areas that equip leaders to navigate the complexities of growth. Bill discusses the common pitfalls that businesses face, the importance of clear strategy articulation, and the role of self-reflection for leaders. He delves into his background in public speaking, continuous self-improvement, and the impact of his own podcast on his business. Bill also shares advice on crafting business strategies, understanding leadership styles, and making a meaningful difference in the world. For more resources, you can visit scalingcoach.com. And as always, if you get value from this podcast, please like and subscribe. It helps our show grow. And now, here's my conversation with Bill Gallagher. Enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Beyond Fulfillment podcast. I'm your host, Dave Goulas, and this week, my guest is CEO, serial entrepreneur, keynote speaker, podcast host, business coach, and founder of scalingcoach.com, Bill Gallagher. Welcome, Bill.
Hey, how are you?
Doing great. I appreciate you taking the time.
Good. Glad to be here with you.
If you could, for everyone, can you tell us your backstory and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, well, I was born in Los Angeles about 60 years ago. How do any of us get started? I think there's entrepreneurship is a bit of an affliction, like it's a condition or a disease that someday somebody will invent a good salve for and clear it right up. But we start at some early age thinking that instead of just working for somebody else, like we could do our own thing. And for whatever reason, we go out and do that, right? Entrepreneurs, business leaders, we want to be calling the shots. We want to be in charge of something. We want to control it. And, I can think of different experiences hustling tickets to the Boy Scout Jamboree when I was a kid and figuring out how to do that better than all the other scouts. I can think about running a paper route, right? It boggles the mind for some of our listeners, viewers today that used to, we had newspapers, right? And they would print things on them, which is like the internet, right? They'd print that on a piece of paper and then they deliver that to you. And then sometimes you get 2 in a day. You definitely get a new one every day, right? And then they'd have a kid like me who'd put them on the front of his bicycle, drive down past the neighbor's house and throw them out at you and then go collect the money from you, right? And you learn things along the way of doing that. And then my first, and then I suppose there's some, special business activities that some of us pursue in high school as we try to increase our social capital and find a few bucks for our lifestyle and that kind of thing. And then in college, I couldn't get into a journalism class. So I thought, or I couldn't work out the timing or something. I forget exactly what the thing was. So I'm like, I'll start a newspaper. And that makes sense, right? Just like I don't know anything about it, so I'm going to start it. That is classic entrepreneur stuff right there. I'm interested in, I don't know anything about it, but I'm going to jump in that business. We see that today in AI, like more than any other place. There are people out there like just throwing their hat in, like I'm going to play with this thing because it's brand new and nobody else knows what they're doing too. And maybe you cover up your imposter syndrome or whatever, but I started a little newspaper and we ran it for a while. Didn't last that long. And then I shut it down and moved on. And I went into a variety of different sales and corporate jobs, marketing jobs, entrepreneurial gigs along the way across a range of industries. And then just as I turned 50, I decided to go full-time into coaching. And I've since coached thousands of companies around the world for the last 10 years. So, it kind of evolved from that. But I knew in my last CEO role, running a business and growing it, that I was enjoying coaching my team and I was enjoying being coached. And I was enjoying doing a little bit of coaching of other CEOs and business leaders on the side. And so I knew I'd kind of want to make it full time.
Okay. And then how did you come up with, because I guess the foundation of what I see from your coaching material is the leadership flywheel.
Yeah. So that's really discerned from, you know, in the course of my corporate jobs and entrepreneurial things, and organizations and groups, associations that I belong to, I was exposed to lots of different things, right? Many different training skills, frameworks, that kind of thing. And this leadership flywheel is a distillation of the things that I learned in leadership. It's none of it really that new or whatever, but it's put together and it focuses on four kind of key skills that we say a leader needs to have and use. And when we use them together in this sequence, it makes a massive difference. So the first is being inspirational, right? So that's like getting people excited. It's playing on the emotions first, right? And you can't do that if you're not excited yourself. So excite yourself, excite other people. That's kind of the connection of it. Then we have to get people to do things, right? Buy things, sell us things, work with us, all that kind of thing. And we call that engaging. So I got people excited. Now I need to get them to take actions around whatever it is that I'm building. And that's engaging. And that is about connecting what I'm excited about to what's interesting to you, whether you be buying, selling, working with, whatever. Leaders that figure out how to make that connection easily, effortlessly, get people to work with them in different capacities and invest in them and do all that. And then after that comes all the planning and coordination. We think of this a lot in our work in scaling up companies. How do we create plans, execute on plans, update plans, coordinate as teams, that whole world. And then the last one is interesting, and people aren't sure where it fits in, but coaching, I say, is the last one. And what is the point of coaching? The point of coaching is to keep people in the game and always leveling up, right? I would say there's two parts to the coaching thing. So people get excited, they get engaged, they start going to work on things, and then they have setbacks. They get disillusioned, they forget why they're there. Coaching keeps them in the game and has them leveling up. So if you bring people back around, remind them of their inspiration, why they're doing it, and replan things, right, you keep elevating. So that's why it's a flywheel. These things as a leader reinforce themselves. And if you can lead to leaders who lead to leaders, right, you can get that kind of pushed out a little bit and create a bigger impact like that. You can accomplish really extraordinary things. So whatever business, interest, problem you're solving in the world, if you could figure out how to engage more people in it with more ease, right, you can increase your effectiveness, your power.
Okay. So that's, of course, an ideal scenario when you have all parts of the flywheel in motion. So when companies come and work with you, what are some of the most common problems you see that CEOs have and companies have in terms of how they're executing?
Well, by far and away, the biggest thing is people start to move on to subsequent stages of scaling before they've really addressed the first stage. And that is they haven't got their strategy clear enough yet. And so they're like, well, just need to attract more people. But you can't attract more people because you haven't been able to say clearly what business you're in, what problem you're solving, and why you're better than anyone else. So much of the work that we would do starts with getting clear about the strategy. What problem do you solve? For what kinds of people? How do you do it differently? Focusing in on a few things like that. Why do you even care? How are you going to work as a team? A few big things like that, clearly articulated in some draft, can make it much easier to attract and engage people, to build your business systems around it. Until then, you're just like scrambling around with things. So the first thing is that, and then playing a big enough game. So we create some strategy, but if it's really just around survival, nobody's that excited. But if we create a strategy around solving a problem that affects 1 billion people, well, now you've got something really interesting to work on. People want to be part of that.
Okay. Okay. So what would you say is when companies do come in to work with you and you have to start addressing some of those issues, what do you think the biggest challenge that you see that the CEO or the entrepreneurs have in terms of changing what they've been doing already?
Well, in working with us, there's really two big problems that present. on the regular. One of them is we want to grow faster, better, again, at all. Like, so there's a growth goal is the biggest number one reason. So maybe the company was growing at one point and then it stalled, or maybe it's growing, but you see a risk to that growth and you feel like you need to evolve your strategy quickly. The first thing that people have is like, okay, we're growing like this, but we want to grow like that. Or we were growing like this, now we're negative or flat, and God, we got to get it going again. So that the hunger for growth is number one. And it's because you think what you do in the world is awesome and more people should have it. You want to do more of it. And you're like, this should be across nationwide or global. Great. Let's play that game. So how do we do that? That's number one. The second one is there's some growth going on, but you're just like overwhelmed. You're not sleeping. You feel like you're carrying too much of the work. Your team's not doing enough, or they don't know how to do anymore. And it's about overwhelm and coordination, and that's more on the execution side. There's a few people that might present with a cash issue, but for the most part, they go to financial experts, even though they probably should address their strategy first. But and there are many people who present with a people problem, like, God, we just need to hire more people. We've seen it less in the last 2 years, but we definitely saw it before for many years. People are like, I just need to be able to find and hire more of the right people. And then, because I have business, that if I just had people to fulfill it, I could grow the business. So, but usually and most often, the key to solving the people problem is not one of our people tools around recruiting better or developing people or organizing them. It's usually starts actually with some strategy, because when you get the strategy really clear and compelling, right, interesting, then attracting people is way easier, right? It's really easy to attract people when you've got a really unique business that's growing like crazy.
Okay.
Everybody wants to be part of that.
You mentioned earlier too, as far as entrepreneurs, very often they'll get inspired and they'll just act. And it's like often like the ready, fire, aim approach, where they'll go into action and start doing something without much of a plan. So
Yes.
how, in terms of that being the DNA of many of the entrepreneurs out there, how would you recommend someone go about it in terms of when's the right time to really, craft a plan, as opposed to, because some people say to imperfect action repeated often is still progress, versus, other people I've had on here talk about meticulous planning before they start. Like, what's your recommendation in terms of how an entrepreneur should execute?
Well, we think there's many different kinds of people, but for sure in the world of running and growing a business, there are two big categories at the top of the leadership of the business. One of them is the entrepreneur that we're talking about here. They're strategic and visionary in nature. They imagine a better future. They have some ambition, and they create the strategy. So they create this vision, and that grows into a full-fledged strategy for the future of the business, or should grow into that. The problem is that they will start to act on it right away without a real plan, without figuring out how much money is needed or it can be made, or if it should even be done in the first place, and what's likely to go wrong, and who is going to need. Like, entrepreneurs, I'm one, we start acting on things. Now, you will immediately get overwhelmed and stressed out and sleepless, or you'll fail. And so many entrepreneurs have already had a failure or two, and something, either a whole company or a project that bombed. And so they begin to recognize the need for a second kind of a person. We call that person an orchestrator, and a conductor. Like, they're the person that is getting all the different parts of the orchestra to play together in a nice way. They're working with people, getting people to work together in a good way. And they're thinking about the sequencing of things and so on. And that person who likes to do things regularly, who likes to plan, is not the same person who generally creates the vision and the strategy for the company. So you got to find somebody to help you do things, who likes routine, who likes consistency, who likes the details. So great, start things, but then let other people do it, and learn when to apply that startup thing versus, the refinement and the follow through.
Attention manufacturers and e-commerce sellers. Is fulfillment a headache for you? Whether you're fulfilling in-house and you know you need to outsource, or you're with another 3PL and you know you deserve better service, Easy DC 3PL can help. We offer personal service, fast response time, and we're flexible to meet your unique needs. Get in touch today and find out how we can help you. Okay. It sounds similar to like the EOS version in terms
Yeah,
of.
so EOS actually came from our work. It's an offshoot of our work or a subset of our work. They named some things differently, but it is entirely drawn from the work that we do. Ours is just a little bit more expanded, more focused on growth.
Okay. And you talk about there's four the four disciplines. Well, you talked about the four disciplines in the flywheel, but also the various leadership styles. So there's some more that you can expand on?
Yeah, so look, there are many different styles of leaders. In the Clifton Strengths World from the Gallup organization, there are four big categories. And the first one is executing, right? Like that person, the business ops manager, the person who gets things done, the person who embraces routine, the person who keeps you out of an IRS audit and out of jail, the person who shows up to work every day and doesn't mind the routine of things. That's an executor. They're hardworking, they're consistent, they follow the rules, like that kind of thing. They're interested in the details. The second person is type is influential leader, right? And they love to evangelize, to persuade. They raise money. They charm the media. They sell, they do the initial sales, right? They are the spokesperson. They do the trade shows. That person, the influencer, is the other type, and they're sales and they're visionary and that kind of thing. The third one is really about relationships. It also relates to the first executor often. And they love to bring people together, to include, to get the best out of people, to organize people in particular ways. They're like the executor in they want to lean into things, but they are very much focused on the people involved in the mix of things. And the last one is strategic in nature. These are the chess players, the planners, and they might not like to manage the ongoing thing, but they love to envision it, to lay out the pieces, to find the path, to analyze. They're the learners and the analysts and the people who gather the information. We call this a strategic focus. So we have these four different kinds of things, and we have these four skills, right? Getting people excited about something that involves creating a vision and expressing it effectively. So that's a little bit of strategy and a little bit of that influence bit. And then there's engaging people. That's influence, and that's often also the relationship building part, but it could be a little bit of the strategy part. And then there's I lost my train of thought. Then the planning part, and that is a mixture of the executor and the strategist, and they're thinking about how to get things done. And then that last piece is coaching. That's very much about people and influence. So I want to understand where you are. I want to allow for your world and your perspective, and then I want to help you like reach ever higher levels of. So we got four different styles of people, and then we got four essential skills that they don't match up exactly, but it's useful to reflect on who are you? What are your skills? So I'm really good on the influence and the strategy side. I'm really terrible on the execution and the people side of things, right? The relationship side of things, I take for granted. I'm in my own head. I'm introverted, like that. And executing, I get bored quickly, right? So I know, and I'm never going to work on trying to get better at those things. Forget that. Just hire it and let other people do it and trust them to do their job. So that's a lot more of like learn yourself and learn other people.
Okay, excellent. How often do you see that as the problem? Like if a company comes to you and they've plateaued and they need growth and they're sputtering, how often is not the right people in the mix? How often is that like the problem that you see?
Always, that's one of the problems. And always the first person to look at is you. the first person to look at when things are gone. It's kind of depressing. It's not in our human nature. I really don't like to do it. When I'm having a frustration or problem, I want anybody else to be responsible than me, except it's much harder to work on anyone else than you. And you're the one who created the mess. You're the one who started it. You're the one who hired them. You're the one who allowed them. You're the one who set the whole thing up. And the way you work is completely in sync with the way everything else is working. So if you think about it, you and the company are like the front and the back of the hand. If you're the leader, the founder of the company, you have the company that you deserve, and you deserve the company you have. So if you want to level up things, if you want to apply new tools and things like that, you also have to work on you, because you're the one who created the mess. Now, that's great news. We don't like doing it because we like emotionally somebody else to be responsible, but it's great news because it's much easier to shift yourself. And little shifts in yourself can help shift everyone else around you, and you lead by example. You lead from the front, right? You do your own work. You're open about it as a leader, and that makes something new possible for the organization.
Okay, excellent. Now, I want to switch gears here and talk about personal branding, and that's something you do a whole lot of. In 2024, how important do you think it is for a business to have a face of the company and to have a like a personal brand?
Well, look, you have a brand, whether you realize it or not. And people relate to you as a stereotype, as an image, as a concept in their own heads. And if you've been intentional about it and built it with intentionality, then it's likely representative of what you want. But in reality, for most of us, we have a reputation. We have a way that we're seen in the world that we often avoid seeing. We'd rather people didn't notice those things about us, and we'd rather they notice the other. And we develop convenient ways of thinking about ourselves that fit that. But there's power in noticing your sort of existing stereotype and then consciously building a personal brand. What do I want to be known for? So, if I take the stage as I did, I don't know, a little over a year ago in Europe, and I know I'm going to face a bunch of Europeans as a entrepreneur from California, I want to maybe acknowledge the fact that I'm a bit salesy, and Americans are viewed as like salesy and simplistic in some of our message. And so if I just say, hey, everybody, I'm from California, and you probably are going to realize that I sound a bit salesy. It's not personal. It's just kind of the way I am. Like, acknowledging that is really powerful. People walk to the front of the room or enter conversations acting a particular way without thinking about, how do I come across to other people? And what do I really want? What do I need to manage and be responsible for? Am I overbearing? Am I meek? Am I silly? Am I irreverent? Am I domineering? Am I too serious, right? Like, can you get how you are and embrace it as one of the possible ways? Then you are not limited by it.
Okay.
That's kind
And
of
so
a big, right? But is that communicating?
you mentioned the public speaking too. Like, what got you started doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, like, in the beginning, um, there's maybe something that's built in DNA, right? Like, I know that I started speaking at a very young age, and that's probably the genetic side of things. My dad was a speaker and a teacher. And my grandfather, my mother's side, was a good speaker. So there's something like that that's kind of built in, like finding the words and being not unafraid to speak up was like right there. But then over time, you develop and expand something. So, opportunities to speak in school and in other places seemed to work out for me. So I did more and more of it. And as I went through life, I did more and more. And then, at different points, I learned, oh, I'm too serious. I'm kind of bland and gray. I should be more playful. And other times I learned, well, I can swing a little too far out there too. I can be too emotional. So along the way, you kind of learn like how to use those things that you do. Um, without having them be unconscious or like whatever. So, as a speaker, I know I can be playful. I know I can be like just like really at home in front of people. I know I can take people through a big range of emotion very quickly. I can make them laugh. I can make them cry. I can, do whatever if I want to. And be at home in that as an authentic kind of an expression, not a simple manipulation.
Okay. And I have to imagine that comes with a lot of practice, right? Like you're saying, is working on
Yeah,
your craft.
look, I have a friend who he was always terrified to speak. So he spent a lot of time at Toastmasters. He just like worked at it till he felt at home in it. And you could develop that, and that would be one way to do it. And maybe you need to master a certain level of it. But like for things that aren't natural for me, I develop routines, I hire people, I surround myself. And for the things that are natural, like I just lean in and I develop those more and more. But I've had voice coaching. I've done work in stand-up comedy. I've done work in structuring my talks. I've done had coaching and facilitation and all these things. So I continue to work on it even to this day. Right? So I'm thinking about how do I use my breath better? How do I stand better? Like, what's working in what I'm doing and how do I do even more of it? And that's like a core strength versus, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about how to be a better operations manager because a long time ago I figured out I will always be a terrible operations manager. So I just hire that to other people.
Have you always had that intrinsic like desire to get better and for personal improvement? Because that's a common trait I see among many entrepreneurs too. It's just always looking to get better at things that matter to them. Like the speaking for you.
Well, I think it's tied to like a core ambition. Are you hungry for something? Do you have some ambition? Over in the corner on the wall opposite me, I have a picture of myself some years ago at a key moment, and it scrawled above it is not finished yet. And I have this personal company value and personal value of never finished. And for me, and then I have another picture elsewhere of Jack LaLanne, who was this like fitness guru who like worked out until he died. And I love that idea of like, I'm still working on myself until I die. Until I take my last breath, I'm working on improving something. I'm getting better at something. That's interesting to me versus thinking at some point I'll like be done, right? And then I'm just coasting. It's not a very interesting life. Although I did think that up until somewhere around 30, 35, definitely before 40. I had this insight. I should figure out what date that was, but I watched somebody do something, and until then, I had worked my career, and I started a family, and I bought a couple houses, and I things like that. And I had this notion that like at some point, like it was going to click, and I was sort of going to transcend basic humanity, and I was going to like be fixed and good, and then I was going to be done and grown up, and like everything's going to be easy, like a childhood kind of thing. And it took me until sometime in my 30s to suddenly realize, oh, you know what? I'm never ever going to be done. And I remember really specifically the instance. I had a guy who was coaching me in something, demonstrate something with someone else, and I watched him F it up. And he should have been fine at this thing, and yet he effed it up, right? And I was working on this thing. He was trying to coach me in it, and I'm like, you know what? I'm never actually like, there's always just getting better. And then there's always making a new mistake or an old mistake. And there's something about like just embracing doing the work, like always being at work on something. It was kind of liberating. And since that moment, I had that insight, and I've been like, I'm just going to try new experiences and new things till I die.
Wow, it's profound. Okay, and then also on the branding side, you started a podcast a few years back. Can you talk about
Yes.
that?
Yeah, so I was in a peer group, a forum group in EO or Entrepreneurs Organization, and one of my forum mates was a guy named Jordan Harbinger, and he's a well-known public figure. We don't talk about what happens in forum, but in this case, it's okay to say it. So Jordan Harbinger is one of my forum mates, And Jordan's a very popular podcaster. And I was just getting started as a coach some years ago. And I'm like, people write books and they create blogs, but I don't really want to, I don't feel like I'm ready for that. I don't want to do any of that. And Jordan said to me, Bill, you have a background in radio. You used to have a radio show. You were a radio executive. Why don't you just start a podcast? That's like how I fill my business, right? At the time, his business has evolved since then. But he's like, you could do that and just make sure you're consistent with it. And those two things were really useful. So yes, it's easy for me to talk and I have a background, like, I can mute my microphone and I can play music and I can do things like I can do that naturally, easily, because I was the kind of DJ that ran my own board and that kind of thing. So that was easy for me. And compared to like writing and putting out things and doing a whole book, I could just get started at it. And then the second part was, so I was leaning into something I was already good at home in. And the second part was do it in a sustainable way. So I spent some amount of time thinking about what the format of the show would look like and what it would sound like, and where this guest stream would come from. Like, I'm going to need somebody new every week forever and ever. And I'm like, it's going to be a weekly show. It's going to be kind of like this. So how do I get those people? And I looked at shows that were not sustainable and overly produced and unaffordable. And I discounted all those kinds of things. I'm like, so I created a couple, and we've been different versions and iterations over the 550 episodes that we've done so far. But, I just looked at how could I do it. So I organized it around doing a recording once or twice a month, and I would just do a bunch of shows and then we would release them every week. And then I got a low cost partner to help me like put the shows out. So all I had to do was kind of record them. And then I gave my assistant a job to kind of schedule them and collect the information, that kind of thing. So I now have an assistant, I have a production company, I have a format, I can do this. It's worked into my schedule, and I just started doing it. And then, pretty much without fail, over these last years, we've done an episode or more every week. And sometimes in the beginning of the pandemic, we did one every day for a little while. Lately, we've been doing 2 a week most of the time. And so for a little while, we ran 3 a week. We didn't find that helped the numbers anyway. So we pulled back from that. Now we're doing 2 a week of 2 slightly different formats. So not hard to do.
And how important and what type of an impact has that had on your business podcast?
Well, so it's had a big one, but here's the thing. Let me skip way ahead for a second and just tell people, don't just go out and start a podcast. So the one thing that I would say that I might have done differently if I could go back, and that I do more of now, is go be on 100 podcasts before you start your own. Go be a guest on a jillion other shows. So you might get on a show with thousands of listeners, or you might get on a show with 12 listeners or 2 listeners. It doesn't really matter. Go be a guest on 1,000 episodes. Go be at least 100, and develop your message, your talk, your immediacy, the tech required. Some people, that's a huge deal for, is just getting the camera and light and the mic and that kind of thing worked out so you're consistent with it. Go do that, and you'll build some business. Then think about having your own show, and only then, I think.
Okay. And with everything that you've done in your business journey, and now with the successful coaching practice and all that, what's been the most rewarding part?
Oh, well, the most rewarding part is the same thing in the beginning. Look, the purpose of my life is to be a contribution. The purpose of my life is to make a difference for people. So in my family, in my home, in my community, I want to be thought of, I want to be remembered after I'm dead and gone as somebody who was generous, who was a contribution. So if that gets said about me when I'm gone, then I lived a successful life. And you think about it in my work is helping leaders, business leaders, build a better world. And each of you out there listening, watching, has some vision of something that you want to do to make the world a little bit better. You may not realize it in that way. You might just think of it as making money. But if you're creating value, you're making the world better in some way, and you're getting paid for that value, unless you're a scammer. And so helping you realize that and like maximize whatever that good that is, is great. And you get to make a profit. You get to make a lot of money. You get to do whatever if you do it well. And I love being the person that does that, because by working with thousands of entrepreneurs every year, some of them a lot more detailed, a small number of them very intimately, and then many quite widely. Um, I feel like I did that, right? And then I think about my life having impact on millions of people. And that's like super gratifying. That's like, I'm proud. And then if I want to go surf tomorrow afternoon or Friday afternoon, as I plan to go, I feel completely great taking that time off and getting out there, and I'm in the water and I'm enjoying myself, and I have a beer afterwards, and I'm like, I did great work this week. I deserve my time.
Wow. All right. All right. And if other entrepreneurs want to get in touch and find more about your coaching and your services, what's the best way that they can do that?
Scalingcoach.com. My website, scalingcoach.com, has our workshops, our coaching programs, a free mini course, a newsletter, our podcast, like all that stuff is there.
Okay. We'll link that in the show notes for everyone as well.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, Bill, thanks so much for taking the time to be here. Enjoyed our conversation. And that's all the time we have for right now. We will see you next time.
Thank you, David.